Hello comrades, it's the Finnish Bolshevik, and we're gonna talk about a movie.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Mission to Moscow.
Now, some of you might be asking, what exactly is Mission to Moscow? Mission to Moscow is a 1943 film based on the 1941 book by the former US ambassador to the Soviet Union, Joseph E. Davies.
And in the book, he basically details his experiences in the Soviet Union, what it was like, what happened. I think the reason he wrote the book, and also the reason why he wanted to turn it into a movie, was basically because he was of the opinion that the US should definitely join in the Second World War on the Allied side and help fight Nazism. And, well, of course the US ruling class was kind of divided on that. A lot of them were saying that they need to either stay out of it, or why is Hitler so bad? Why can't we do business with Hitler? There were even some people like that. Well, Davies was of the opinion that no, we definitely have to help fight against Hitler.
Yeah, he was basically an honest, principled liberal.
Yeah, the movie even starts with him saying that he's a liberal capitalist and whatnot. He's not a communist. So basically the plot of the movie is, I guess in terms of genre, it's the Wikipedia page calls it a faux documentary. I would call it a docudrama. It's supposed to be non-fiction, but it's told in the form of like a fiction movie, so it's like a fictionalized account of more or less real events. Basically the film shows Davies, the American ambassador. It shows how he arrives to the Soviet Union. He sees the rise of fascism in Europe. He witnesses the 5-year plans, the industrialization of the country, the army being modernized.
The movie is also well known for talking about the Moscow trials, because Davies used to be a lawyer and he was present at the Moscow trials.
And even though he was a liberal capitalist and the American ambassador, he still thought that the Moscow trials were not frame-ups and not a scam or a fraud of some kind, but they were real serious trials, and that the defendants at the trials, to him, seemed guilty. After that, the Second World War is just about to start. Germany is going to invade Poland and the Soviet Union any moment, so Davies, he leaves in 1938. He goes to the UK, meets Churchill. He's happy that Churchill is ready to fight against Hitler and doesn't want to appease Hitler. And then he goes back to the US and tries to convince the American public as well as American politicians that they should fight against Hitler. This movie exists in a kind of an interesting time in history, in an interesting place, because obviously, especially for American standards, it's pretty pro-Soviet. People say that it's pro-Soviet propaganda. It's one of those few movies that presents a pretty objective picture about the Soviet Union. I don't know, do you want to talk about the factual claims that the movie makes?
Yeah, besides I noticed the film is mainly a courtroom drama. That's how the beginning is built up to be, and in the middle is mostly that. But there's a lot of details about specific cultural norms in the Soviet Union. For instance, when the ambassador is first getting on a train to the Soviet Union, he sees a female engineer and asks that they allow girls to ride with the engineer, and then the Russian tour guide with him explains that she is the engineer.
Yeah, it's a great scene.
Yeah, really good scene.
So, this is Russia, eh? Da. Well, where's the caviar? You are eating some now. It's in your bread. Say, do you let girls ride with the engineer? She's the engineer. Hi.
Basically, the fact claims that the movie makes, remember, this was aimed to basically tell these facts to Americans in the early 1940s. Okay, they're explaining that in socialism, people don't just get the same exact pay, no matter how hard they work or something. That's not true. Briefly talks about the women's rights in the Soviet Union, explaining that the Russians are just normal people. I don't remember, do they talk about religion?
Not that I recall.
There's another movie that's sort of similar called Days of Glory That's an American film, also made in the 40s, that depicts Soviet partisans. And I think in that movie they talk about how you can still be a Christian in the Soviet Union or something, because I think one of the partisans has a cross or something. A bunch of the things that the movie says is that the Nazis are saying that the Soviet army is super weak. The US didn't want to join the Soviet side in the war if the Soviet army is just gonna be like decimated in seconds, but Davies was of the opinion that actually the Soviet army is quite strong. And of course, that's not a crazy claim to make. He proved to be perfectly correct about that. He says that the 5-year plans turned out to be a success and were industrializing the country and whatnot. And of course, at the time, the capitalist media was saying that the 5-year plans are going to fail and that they're going to be a disaster. But of course, once again, we know that they did help Russia industrialize, and they were a big contributing factor to them winning the war. So the points that he's arguing in the book and in the movie, they're not really all that crazy, all that propagandistic or something. They're simply factual statements. But how did a movie like this ever get made? How did the US allow the production of a movie that gives a more objective and more accurate depiction of the Soviet Union without just slandering and attacking the Soviet Union? Well, it was made in early 1943, so obviously during the war, and it was this exceptional circumstance because they were in the Second World War and they were both on the same side fighting against Germany. For this reason, the US allowed the creation of a small handful of movies that were either pro-Soviet or at least painted the Soviets in a more realistic light and depicted Russian characters as actual people instead of these weird monsters or something.
Yeah, I have to say, I think it was a interesting period where if you look at something like Most Dangerous Game from, I think, 33, it was not that long ago. The main villain in that is Russian, and basically only talks shit about how awful Russia is in the 20s then. And then, of course, there's the whole Asiatic hordes. But I think with this movie, and it's a matter of convenience, because obviously you need to show your public that you're allies in a war. You know, you're not allied with subhumans who can barely fight or whatever, because then you would lose prestige. And then that's why I think you start seeing at least a more humanizing attitude towards the Russians. And also in music, this was an interesting period for American-Soviet relations.
Oh, yeah.
Something like Stalin Wasn't Stalin, which is an incredibly pro-Stalin song. But not even from a communist point of view, still from a very American point of view.
This movie has some pretty good music too. They used a bunch of actual Soviet music, even though it was recorded by an American orchestra, I think. Actually, right before this movie was made, the US made some outright anti-communist movies as well. They made this ridiculous, winter war movie. You remember that?
Is that the one where they fight on a mountain?
Yeah. Yeah, in 1940, the US made this preposterous winter war movie called Ski Patrol. The Wikipedia page is priceless. It says, the plot takes great historical liberties in its storyline.
No shit.
Yeah, you can say that again. They're fighting on these crazy tall mountains. They obviously don't know that Finland, let alone Karelia, doesn't have any mountains in it. Yeah, not only was there Russophobia and more covert anti-communism in American movies at the time, but they even made outright anti-Soviet, anti-communist propaganda movies, which were not remotely historically accurate. And of course, right after the war ended, McCarthyism happened. The House Committee of Un-American Activities, which was an organization that basically tried to hunt down communists in the US, they cited Mission to Moscow as one of the 3 noted examples of pro-Soviet films in Hollywood. And apparently they said that it's unquestionably the most blatant piece of pro-Stalinist propaganda ever offered by the American mass media.
What were the other 2?
North Star and Song of Russia. I haven't seen those. Mission to Moscow is still a pretty objective look. It has a very dry, docudrama style to it. It's not much of a propaganda movie in that sense. It doesn't use any propagandistic tactics whereas something like Days of Glory is an actual action movie with Russian partisans like killing Nazis, and it lends itself more to like propagandistic use, in my opinion. In case people don't know, there was a thing called the Hollywood Blacklist, which basically meant that movie producers, actors, other people involved in producing movies were basically blacklisted, meaning they couldn't get a job in the movie business anymore because they were suspected of being communists. Being a communist is not supposed to be a crime in the US, and none of those people were ever tried for being communists. It's actually pretty funny. Like, they talk about Russian fraudulent fake trials supposedly, but then they go on and have their own actually fraudulent trials. They were claiming that Hollywood is like this nest of communist liberals spreading red propaganda to every living room and stuff like that. Similar to the whole conspiracy that every college professor is a secret Marxist, like brainwashing your children, you know?
Postmodern cultural neo-Marxist.
Precisely. Of course, there were actual communists like Paul Robeson, who was entirely blacklisted and entirely purged from ever making movies again, and his career was ruined by it. But he never hid the fact that he was a communist.
There was also Dalton Trumbo.
Chaplin, of course. In modern times, the 1930s Chaplin movie, it has like some low-key socialist moments, and then of course he made the movie against Hitler.
A great dictator. The movie that got him blacklisted was the 1947 film Monsieur Verdot, in which he marries older rich women to murder them and then steal their fortunes. It was a criticism of capitalism, and that's what finally got him blacklisted and then eventually exiled.
Really?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty obscure. I haven't seen that one. It sounds pretty allegorical, and they still figured out that it was against capitalism.
Yeah.
Interesting. You want to talk about the production quality of the movie?
Yeah, sure.
Mission to Moscow has probably one of the worst Stalins.
Yeah, if there was a scale of movie Stalins, this would be the one on 0.
If like Mikhail Gelovani or whatever his name is, if he's like 10, then this guy is like other end of the spectrum. The movie Stalin spectrum. The guy in the HBO Stalin movie is also pretty terrible. I mean, he resembles Stalin, like... You know what he actually looks like? He looks like the fucking Red Alert Stalin.
Yeah.
And he sounds like Wario.
I think all their money went into getting the best-looking Kalinin as possible, and then they didn't have any for Stalin.
They just got some, like, older guy who has kind of the same hair and then a fake mustache. But it's pretty jarring, because in the movie they also show stock footage of the real Stalin.
Kind of like an Ed Wood movie. It's very obvious when it's stock footage and it's not.
True that. But apart from that, I mean, it looks pretty accurate when they're in the Kremlin. It pretty much looks like the Kremlin. The parade scene when they're outside watching the military parade, that was done okay.
Yeah, and I also think, besides the Stalin, they did a pretty good job on costume design and actually getting actors that looked like other party officials.
The one thing people bring up sometimes is that when they're depicting the Moscow trials, I think Davies was only present at the Bukharin trial, but in the movie they show Bukharin and then Tukhachevsky at the same trial for the sake of simplicity. In reality, the Tukhachevsky trial was secret. Tukhachevsky's trial was a military trial that was not open to the public, so people sometimes point to that as like falsifying history or something, but I don't think it was meant to be like as detailed as that. They don't mention that there were several trials and not just one trial. Like, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, it was just a shorthand.
Yeah, it really changes nothing.
Did they use the actual transcript from the Bukharin trial?
I don't think so. I mean, they paraphrased it a little bit, I think. He was basically saying, like, yeah, Trotsky said that he's not in connection with us, but he is, which turned out to be true. That our plan was to, if Germany attacks, we make an unfavorable peace with Germany. We give them, like, a bunch of territory, and then we make a peace. Then we get to take power in the Soviet Union. He even says in the movie, when they ask who was supposed to be the leader of your coup, he says that we were not in agreement about that. Which is a bit surprising, because if it was supposed to be a propaganda movie or something, why didn't they just say, like, oh, Trotsky or something? But he says we were not in agreement about that, which is what the actual documentary evidence points to.
Now, we talked about what was accurate and correct in this movie. Do you think we should talk about what wasn't correct?
Go ahead.
For example, the scene when Davies is crossing through Germany to get to the Soviet Union, and as he's leaving, the Germans seem to know about the upcoming Moscow trials. They offhandedly, real sneakily mention.
Basically, the Germans imply that they've handled the Soviet Union, they've taken care of the Soviet Union because they have their own people on the inside of the Soviet government, referring to the fact that they have these conspirators in there. And at the trial, the conspirators say, oh yeah, we were supposed to do this on behalf of Germany and Japan. Of course, the Japanese and German, ambassadors walk out of the trial. But once again, what a crazy accusation to say that the Germans and the Japanese were plotting something against the Soviet Union. Crazy accusation, right? I'm sure this is just anti-Japanese, anti-Nazi propaganda. Slander.
Yeah. Did Davies actually meet Stalin?
Yeah, he did. The budget for the movie was like $1.5 million, so not like a crazy expensive movie, kinda typical.
Yeah, there's no sweet Dutch angles.
Yeah, and it's not a color movie. Of course, that's not unusual, like most movies in the 40s were black and white, but there were some exceptions to that.
Yeah, the camera's mainly steady or doing some zoom, but it's very utilitarian there and gets the job done.
I would encourage everybody to definitely watch this movie. It's a very interesting movie. To me, it's so crazy that this was even allowed to be made. A really exceptional movie, in my opinion.
It's interesting how it's pro-Soviet, but still in a very American way, on very American terms.
And even the ending of it, it's not a pro-socialist movie by any means. The ending of the movie just says, let's hope for world peace and, human fraternity and friendship and stuff like that. It's very general, humane values.
Yeah, and the main, pro-Soviet aspects of it mainly are just Davies realizing that Soviets and Americans aren't so different.
All throughout the movie, he stresses that I'm a capitalist, you're socialist, but we have a common enemy and we're also people. You guys are not aggressing on anybody. We shouldn't aggress on you. Hitler is trying to conquer the world, so he's the one we should be worried about. It argues for friendly relations towards the Soviet Union, but not in favor of communism. It's basically like a movie in favor of peaceful coexistence.
Diplomatic than political or war movie or historical drama.
That's what he tried to do. I mean, he wanted better relations with the Soviet Union and he wanted to stop Hitler.
Specifically, how would you rate this movie out of 10?
That's a difficult question. I mean, I would probably say 9 out of 10. Kind of weird. How do you rate a movie like this?
Yeah, because I think, that's the thing, I think one thing when it comes to rating, we should be a bit objective. If we weren't communist, would it still be a decent movie? And I think its pace and matter-of-fact, documentary storytelling is enough to still warrant it being an interesting movie to watch.
Yeah, it is an interesting movie, although, some of the stuff in it seems a bit random. There's so much partying or something and, doing kind of random everyday things. Is that really what they thought the public wanted to see? Russians dancing or something? I mean, maybe. It's a pretty long movie, 2 hours and 4 minutes. It could be a little bit shorter, and it wouldn't really hurt it. But it's one of those movies that when it ends, you still expect more, because you're like, oh, well, what happens next? I want to see them win the war and everything. But then it just ends because it was obviously made in 43.
Hit like and subscribe if you want Mission to Moscow 2.
Remake.
2019. God, I'm so glad this is going to be edited. Biggest dickheads in the world.
Thank you very much for watching. Please like the video and subscribe. All of my social media links are in the description, as well as a link to my Patreon. See you next time, comrades.